Good morning. I'm Marylin Geewax from National Public Radio. Again, just to introduce our guest, the governor of Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell. He's the former mayor of Philadelphia, and he's now the governor, Democratic governor of the sixth most populous state. Also with us this morning is Rosa DeLauro, who is from the 3rd District of Connecticut in the House of Representatives. She's a Democrat who's on the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee. And they asked me to moderate this panel on jobs today, and I feel like I'm highly qualified for this because I grew up in Youngstown. And my early career was spent, my cub reporter years was with the Akron Beacon Journal covering the 1981-82 recession, where so many jobs in steel and tires, auto industry in Northeast Ohio was collapsing. So I sort of have spent a whole career interviewing people who have lost their jobs, watching the economy go up and down, covered the recession in the early 90s, and it was always me asking the questions until last year when the financial crisis hit. And in my family, I have 2 brothers. One worked for Countrywide in mortgages, another one worked for manufacturing in Northeast Ohio, and I worked in a newspaper Washington bureau. All 3 of us lost our jobs within a 3-month period. Complete wipeout of it. So instead of looking at job losses as some remote problem, somebody else's problem, it was suddenly my own family that was being hit by this. Well, I managed to re-career into radio, but, you know, as my mother might have said, couldn't one of yous work for the Google? Anyway. So I am trying to, when I was back home over Christmas last year in Ohio, I talked to a lot of my relatives about how bad the recession was. Remember that in January of last year, about three-quarters of a million jobs were lost. And in those darkest times around the start of the new year, I asked a lot of my relatives, do you have any hope? And their big reason for optimism was that there was a new president and there would be this stimulus package, and they were really counting on jobs coming to Ohio on the basis of the stimulus. Well, the other day there was a government report on how did the stimulus package, how many jobs have been created, and it showed that in Ohio so far 699 jobs have been created. So my question for folks here is first, the governor is to tell us a little bit about, if we're now, you know, well into October and the numbers are showing that only 699 jobs were created in Ohio, I would suspect that in a lot of ways Pennsylvania is pretty similar. Do you feel the federal stimulus has done a lot to get jobs?
First, let me respond to the question, then I'll give you my prepared talk in as much as I ever prepare for anything. But let me answer the question. I can't speak for Ohio. Those numbers are no offense, but complete bull. In Pennsylvania, we have 7,000 people who are working directly on bridge, road, water and sewer infrastructure projects. 7,000 people. Now, the way the OMB counts the numbers, they count full-time equivalency. And in construction jobs on site, one person works for the first 3 months of the project, the next person works for the next 5 months of the project, etc. So when you boil it down, those 7,000 jobs only count for about 1,000 in the way the OMB counts. Secondly, we don't count indirect jobs. Every time we do a bridge, in addition to the people on the bridge, there are people back in the factories that are getting orders, which wouldn't be getting orders if we didn't have the stimulus program. And that's steel factories, asphalt, concrete, timber, electrical supplies, you name it, paint, you name it. All of those factories are gearing up because of the orders from the stimulus program. And then thirdly, and it's a point the president makes, and it's a point that's well taken, and that is jobs retained. This year in the Pennsylvania budget, and we were the last state to have a budget after 101 days of delay, this year there's $2.6 billion of stimulus money. That goes basically to help us defray the cost of increased Medicaid, corrections, and to some degree education. Take away that $2.6 billion, and there would be somewhere between 10 and 15,000 layoffs, mandatory layoffs of state, county, municipal workers, teachers, policemen, firefighters, government workers, all across the board. So the administration is estimating in Pennsylvania that they've saved or retained 43,000 jobs so far, and I think that's a whole lot closer to the money than 690. I mean, 690 is a ridiculous figure, and I know if Governor Strickland was here, he would say the exact same thing. Now, Pennsylvania is doing very well because we have a great leader, of course. We're 7th in the nation in percentage of stimulus money that we've spent already. But the good news is we're going to continue to gear up, and by next spring, by March and April, the construction cycles ought to be at their height, and we ought to be in full gear. Is the stimulus a panacea? No. Is the way it's crafted perfect? Absolutely not. There should have been 3 times as much infrastructure in it, and Senator Boxer and Senator Imhoff actually tried to get the infrastructure spending tripled. The tax cuts in the stimulus have had marginal results, if any at all. We should have had much more infrastructure. But to the extent that it exists, it is working, it is beneficial, and there are tons of people who would otherwise be out of jobs without it. Now, I was told we were supposed to speak on what state and federal governments can do to help the job picture. And really, this could be called a competitiveness discussion, because we need to get competitive in so many ways as a country. First and foremost, that starts with trade. And I don't know if Leo Hendry touched on this in the previous panel. My guess is he did. We've got to get serious about fair trade. Well, we have been, certainly in the 8 years of the Bush administration, we have been, I'm trying to think of a nice word, we have been nonviolent when it comes to enforcing our rights under the WTO. Take pipe. China dumped pipe to try to get rid of the American pipe industry. We in Pennsylvania, myself, Leo Gerard, representing the steelworkers, John Surmer, representing U.S. Steel, we all complained bitterly to the Bush administration. It took about 4 years before they dropped the quota card. By that time, we'd lost 5,000 pipe jobs in Pennsylvania, and the piping industry was pretty much gone. We're scared of China. And why should we be, since they own all our debt? But we're scared of China. Until we roll up our sleeves and go to battle with China on things like theft of intellectual property, on currency manipulation, on trade violations, until we get serious, American manufacturing is going to keep taking it into year. Time to get serious. That's number one. Number two, this nation, and I know Rosa and I agree on this, in fact, we're the pairing us together on this panel is probably overkill, but we believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, the U.S. should do what every one of the G7 nations has done in the last 20 years, and that's undertake a massive infrastructure repair program. And I'm not just talking about transportation. Transportation gets the focus of the debate. I'm not talking about just transportation. I'm talking about water and wastewater systems. I'm talking about the American dams, ports, locks, levees, you name it. All of those things are in terrible condition. We're absolutely crumbling, and nobody's doing anything about it. And the president, certainly the infrastructure that's in the stimulus program, we're grateful for. It's a good start, but it's only a start. We've got to get serious. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates just to take the infrastructure we have and put it in solid condition would take $2.2 trillion of spending over the next 5 years. If you throw in high-speed rail, and I believe the president when he said he wants to have a high-speed rail system across the country, that's another $1.5 trillion. We're talking about $3.5 to $4 trillion of spending. But if you believe the experts, and I do, that infrastructure, $1 billion of infrastructure spending produces anywhere from 20 to 40,000 jobs, somewhere in that matrix. Think of what that would do for us. Think of what that would do for our country in terms of job produced. And jobs on infrastructure, A, can't be outsourced, B, they're good paying, family sustaining jobs, and C, they produce a lot of orders for American factories. were the factors that I just mentioned. It would juice up, to do this over the next 5 or 10 years, would juice up the American economy and do something incredibly substantively important. We're getting kicked all over the place because we're not competitive in infrastructure anymore. The top 10 ports in China take 4 times the throughput of the top 10 ports in the U.S. Only 2 of our ports, LA, Long Beach, and New York, New Jersey, would even make the top 10 in China. And in 5 years, it's estimated that Shanghai will take more throughput than all of American ports put together. Disgraceful. Disgraceful. We're getting our brains beat in, and we've got to roll up our sleeves and get to work and do something important. We've got to invest in our future. Energy. The president's dead right. Energy. We've got to invest in energy. Energy can be to the next 20 years what IT and life sciences have been to the last 20 years. And government can help by incentivizing. Pennsylvania leads the states east of the Mississippi in renewable and alternative energy growth in jobs and businesses because we've invested nearly $1 billion to incentivize and to create the right type of environment for that growth. Also, government should use its ability to create markets. Think for a minute, if Boone Pickens were here, he'd be talking all about using natural gas for our vehicles. Not such a bad idea. But think for a minute, if every governmental subdivision, local, municipal, county, state, and federal, turned all of its fleets into natural gas fleets, you would create a huge market. All of a sudden, you wouldn't have to look for a natural gas station. They'd be all over the place. They'd be all over the place. Use our buying power. Be the off-taker for alternative and renewable energy. If government did that, it would have an explosive effect in bringing down the price of renewable energy, creating the markets, having more businesses start up for certain. Mandates, alternative energy portfolio standards. Pennsylvania has one of the most aggressive in the country. The federal government, the Congress ought to pass a national AEPS without further delay. Forget cap and trade, the debate on cap and trade. Everybody should agree that a federal AEPS is crucial. It's crucial to creating markets. In Pennsylvania, we went one step further. We created a biofuels mandate. Pennsylvania sells at the pump. We're a great pass-through state. We sell 11.4 billion gallons of fuel a year. We've now mandated by the time the distribution system reaches a certain level, and we think it will be by 2012, that 1 billion of those gallons have to come from biofuels. It's a mandate, just like AEPS. We're creating a mandate for cellulosic ethanol, a mandate for biodiesel, a mandate for all sorts of alternative fuels. Let's do it. That's what government can do. Create mandates, create markets. Lastly, education. We can't be 19th in science and 21st in math and be competitive down the future. We can't do that. We're going to lose all of the important jobs. All of the things that are innovative and new and creative aren't going to be done in America if we don't improve our educational system. States and federal government have the duty and responsibility to invest in education. And I know the conservatives say, well, look, Washington, D.C. spends the most money per pupil and it's got the poorest results. It's not how much money you spend, it's how you spend it. It's how you spend it. In Pennsylvania, in the last 6.5 years, according to the National Center on Education, the Education Research Council in Washington, a think tank, we're the only state in the union that's had significant improvement in test scores at every level, elementary, middle, and high school, in every subject. The only state in the union. We finished 4th in English scores in the NAEP test and 7th in math scores. If you compare that to where we were 7 years ago, it's startling improvement. It didn't happen by accident. We invested in A, full-day kindergarten, B, pre-K, a significant amount of pre-K, B, smaller class sizes, K through 3, D, technology in the schools, science taught at the elementary school level with new and innovative science programs. Higher standards, we're battling for higher standards. Secretary Duncan is right on. The federal government should be an investment partner in all those things that we know work. Higher standards, competitiveness, building a strong foundation in early childhood. If we do all those things, we can be back on track. And also, we got to pay for the right type of teachers. We got to pay for the right type of teachers. STEM education is crucial. And the only way we will continue to have STEM education at a high level in this country is to be competitive for math teachers and science teachers. Take those engineers coming out of school and offer them salaries that are competitive, not necessarily right on the same dollar for dollar as the private sector, but competitive. And there's a wonderful program in New York City that does just that, that gives them fellowships for the first 4 or 5 years that they teach. No question about that. And we've also got to find a way to get young girls involved in STEM education at the earliest grade level. We are fighting this battle with one hand tied behind our back because we're not getting our brightest young women into STEM fields. They're not getting into it. Law school, medical school, business school, 50% plus women in all the classes. Engineering, 17%, math, PhD, 4%. Gotta change.
Representative DeLauro, and I guess my question to kick her off would be, Congress approved a $787 billion stimulus package. Some people are disappointed with the number of jobs created. Do you think it was well crafted, effective, and should we have a second stimulus package?
Good morning to all. Let me answer your question, Marylin, and before I deal with my remarks, but I'll also incorporate the question that you posed to Governor Rendell. And if you just take a look at the Washington Post this morning, you will just see page 4A, a report says stimulus preserved education jobs. And the governor just spoke about education. A federal economic recovery aid has created or saved 250,000 education jobs. It goes through what was saved, who, principals, teachers, etc. And that would have been increased chaos for states if it wasn't there. Take a look at September 28th, not that long ago, Wall Street Journal headline, funds speed transformation towards smart grid. After struggling to sell cutting-edge products to utilities, tech companies are sensing better times ahead with the influx of $4.5 billion in federal stimulus funds for so-called smart grid projects. Now, those are short-term projects as well as, and we know about the investment in long-term. Our investments, what that would mean in terms of the grid overall. So yes, in fact, their jobs have been created. Is it the silver bullet? No. I share the governor's view that we should have had increased funding for infrastructure. I've been talking about that now for about the last 15 years. Unfortunately, I deal in an institution where, at least in the House, you have to have 218 votes to go anywhere. And that means 218. Did you ever try to get your friends to go to the movies on Saturday night? Take 4 or 5 of them, and you've got a lot of opinions. Let me just tell you about trying to get 218 people to try to move. So let me move on. A couple words by way of thanks. I must say a thank you to Bernard Schwartz. This symposium is named after Bernard, and he's just been such a leader. New America, philanthropic efforts, other organizations. He really is a fixture in the progressive firmament. So, his call has gone beyond the call of service, and we thank him very much. It's a pleasure to be on this dais with Governor Rendell. We've had the opportunity to work together on some of the issues that he spoke about today. He is a great advocate for these proposals, a great leader in Pennsylvania. But for me, it's really, he has stepped up in terms of being a pioneer and an innovator and a strong voice for rebuilding America and for creating jobs through infrastructure. And to the New America Foundation, Michael Lynn, thank you for all of your efforts. To all of you, we are going to need all of the expertise as we come to terms with what is a dire economic situation. You've had the Fed Chair, Bob Bernanke, has suggested that this Great Recession is finally drawing to a close. That welcome news may look good on paper, and it may help the Dow, but it has not reached the labor markets or the paychecks. By some accounts, the job market may prove more than a lagging indicator, but a long-term drag on growth and on middle-class prosperity. Jeff Garin, Peter Hart just did a poll where they have said more than 8 out of 10 voters, 85%, believe we are still in a recession. 57% of Americans, more than half, are close to someone who has been laid off. 4 out of 5 Americans, 83%, see unemployment as a big problem and not likely to end soon. Well, those Americans are right. Unemployment is a big problem right now. It gets scarier all of the time. We've lost an estimated 8 million jobs since the recession began in December 2007. Last month was the 21st month in a row of job losses, the longest stretch since the Great Depression. September saw 263,000 more jobs disappear, raising the unemployment rate to 9.8%. The only reason why it didn't go higher was because over 500,000 workers dropped out of the labor force. I think what's even more troubling is unemployment is projected to remain higher for several years to come, perhaps even past 2013. With the size of the potential workforce growing, even as the economy sheds jobs, more and more new jobs will be required each year just to make up for an increasing shortfall. And what you have in the meantime is unemployed, underemployed. They are suffering. At a bare minimum, they're forced to cut back spending to make ends meet, which means stagnant consumption. It leads to slower job growth. It becomes a vicious cycle. That's the short-term economic cost. Long-term, the human costs are more troubling. Lack of access to education, the governor was talking about, malnutrition, poverty, a lost generation of American workers. We originally created the Earned Income Tax Credit and ended welfare on the assumption that people would have ready access to jobs. This is no longer the case. And it means our problem is not just a recovery problem. It is much, much bigger than that. And yet, however bad the economic picture looks today, it would have been much worse had we not passed the economic recovery program. January, the month before we acted, saw 741,000 jobs lost, almost 500,000 more than last month. So we've staunched the bleeding. You listen to Council of Economic Advisors, created or saved over 1 million jobs through the recovery program. EPI, Economic Policy Institute, suggests that the Recovery Act is saving or creating between 200 and 250,000 jobs a month. Not much of a consolation to those who are still unemployed, but the fact is that the frightening unemployment rates could have been much worse. And I stand here proud of what we passed in about a 2-week period of time. Nothing has happened in the Congress in a 2-week period of time. It was a nanosecond, and we sat with economists who first talked about, before we left, before this session of the Congress, we were talking about $60 billion. We came back after an election, and economists started talking about $100 billion, $300 billion, $500 billion, and in my view, it should have gone over $1 trillion. I would have been there for more money, particularly on infrastructure, because that's the kind of investment that is going to grow this economy. So no matter what the naysayers will say, they can prognosticate all they want. They weren't sitting there when folks talk to us about going over into the abyss and a financial collapse and having to deal with unbelievable forecasting in terms of what unemployment should be all about. Yes, we were looking at shovel-ready projects, loans to states, and perhaps maybe we even now have to think about job-based tax credits. We also need to make sure that those already unemployed in this economy have the resources that they need to make it through. We need to extend unemployment benefits. I don't know what you want to call it, Marylin, but I believe Connecticut has 8.1% unemployment. We were at 4.9% last year. The bill we passed in the House covers states that are 8.5%. So we're sucking wind in Connecticut, and those folks are still unemployed. So we've got to do something about people who are out of jobs today. So you can call it what you want. Second stimulus, you pick a name. I don't care. But we need to extend the unemployment benefits. We need to expand the tax credit for first-time homebuyers and potentially expand it for others as well. Extend COBRA benefits for laid-off workers so that they can keep their health insurance. And yes, issue extra payments to more than the 50 million Social Security recipients who will not see a cost of living increase next year. We have to lower the threshold on a child tax credit so that today a worker who's lost his or her job, lost their health care benefits, and if they had a child tax credit, they have lost that as well. And yes, we have to increase food stamps. So, state and local government, no one knows better than Ed Rendell about the horrible circumstances that our states are facing and the shortfalls that they are facing. And what that means is shedding more jobs, slashing the Social Security a safety net, a social safety net for people, and that impacts the most vulnerable citizens. So it's, you know, what we're looking at, how do we provide refundable tax credits to low-income workers, to our poor citizens? What do we do about food banks and food pantries, kitchens, nutrition programs that are being overwhelmed by the crisis that American families are facing today? We have to find a way to help them, and we have to look at how we create jobs. I'm going to move to talking about, you've heard me I talk about the problems, you know about the problems. There's some ways in which that have been laid out that we can address job creation. But let me address the issue that I think is both a short-term solution and a long-term solution. In his book, Bold Endeavors, we have investment banker Felix Rosen, former ambassador to France, 17-year head of the New York Municipal Assistance Corporation. He talks about the government's vital role in creating and sustaining prosperity. In it, he makes a key point, and let me quote him. American history shows that economic growth, the creation of wealth, employment, and opportunity are all built on the platform of investment, innovative public investment. We could go through all of the efforts with the New Deal in the midst of the Depression, where we saw unprecedented investments in national infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways, tunnels, parks, public buildings, all across this country. With the WPA, the REA wired the areas for electricity, TVA built hydroelectric dams in the Tennessee Valley. The infrastructure investments did more than just put millions of people to work. They generated infrastructure capital that yielded decades of continued prosperity. And it was, if you left that behind, America's continued economic vitality has always rested on the foundation of our infrastructure, whether it is the Erie Canal, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Federal Highway Act, and the Internet. The chapters of American history and the success stories have been written in stone and in mortar, iron and steel, and granite and fiber optics. So, what should we do in the midst of this economic crisis? We ought to take a page from our history. We ought to have a high return federal investment in growing our gross domestic product, sound economics, and sound policy. We need to invest in energy, in transportation, telecommunications, so that we can keep jobs now and be competitive in the future. What we have introduced in the House, myself, Representative Ellison, from Minnesota, representatives from New York, Steve Israel, and Anthony Weiner, is a National Infrastructure Development Bank. It would establish a development bank for America, an independent entity which would objectively consider infrastructure projects, provide financing for those with clear economic, environmental, and social benefit. The sense is that we could leverage private dollars to issue up to $625 billion in 30-plus year public benefit bonds, provide direct subsidies to states and other localities for their infrastructure projects from amounts made available from the issuance of the bonds. Funding from the bank would supplement, not supplant, current financing mechanisms. This is modeled after the European Investment Bank, which is European Union's long-term lending bank, which has raised private sector capital from around the globe to leverage that kind of development. I'm told I've got 30 seconds left, so let me just say this to you. Even though we deal in 1 minute and 30 seconds on the floor of the House, look, this kind of an effort has, in fact, worked wonders for the European Union. It could work wonders for us. Every $1 billion spent on transportation creates 47,500 jobs. It's clear that jobs cannot be outsourced. There are private funds out there waiting to be utilized. I would make one final point, and the bank, by the way, has had tremendous support. National Governors Association, through the influence of Governor Rendell, American Society of Civil Engineers, Construction, Building Trades, Chamber of Commerce. You've got the Construction Chamber Trades and the Chamber of Commerce on this. We can't be too far off the mark. We've got again, Governor Schwarzenegger, Mayor Bloomberg, Governor Rendell with Build America's Future. I would add one point to what Governor Rendell said. We need to do this right, and it was during the 2008 campaign that the president spoke of a $60 billion infrastructure bank that will, quote, multiply into almost half $1 trillion of additional infrastructure spending, generate nearly 2 million jobs. We need the administration to make the strong commitment to the bank that make this a reality. It can't be a piecemeal approach, which in my view has been currently suggested about placing funding in the Department of Transportation. I think it's a narrow vision. I think it doesn't create the kind of entity we need. I believe the entity needs to be under the direction of the Treasury, because that's where you can go to the capital markets and you can borrow. In sum, the bank is the type of bold, outside of the box thinking we need right now to foster long-term economic growth, to create jobs, and to generate a recovery that will last for years, if not for decades. Thank you very much, and sorry to have gone over my time.
Thank you, and I realized when I sat down that I may have mispronounced your last name, and as someone named Geewax, I invite you all to take a shot. Any way you want to pronounce that, Geewax, Geewax. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that Steve said that there was a Republican invited to join the panel, but scheduling troubles ensued, and that didn't work out. So, Governor Rendell said he would like to make a quick comment on the second stimulus idea, and then we'll go to some questions if he'll quickly give us that comment.
Real quick, I want to say, first of all, infrastructure is an issue that has always had bipartisan support. It's actually been for years. You roll the clock back 10, 15 years ago. It's been a Republican issue, and Senator Imhoff, who, as you know, is the ranking member on one of the transportation committees. Senator Imhoff said that he thought it was the second most important thing government could spend money on after defense. And I think that the infrastructure bank and the bold vision that Rosa has enunciated has the opportunity to get a lot of bipartisan support. There ought to be a second stimulus for two reasons. Number one, when the stimulus money drops off, and that won't be this current fiscal year, it won't be next fiscal year, it'll be the following fiscal year, it'll be fiscal year 2012. When it drops off, there will be huge gaping holes in states' budgets. Unless you want a dramatically counter-cyclical approach which will cause massive layoffs, there has to be some phase down of the aid to the states. It cannot just drop off the shelf in 1 year. And I say that as a governor who won't be there in fiscal year 2012. I'm term limited, and part of me would like to see it fall off and people say, boy, this never would have happened if Governor Rendell was still here. but I do believe that we need that help for all the governors and legislators that are going to be there. So there has to be a phase down of that support. And secondly, the second stimulus should be all about infrastructure other than that. And one of the ways that I've actually proposed this to the White House, is take ICE-T, and obviously no one wants to pay for ICE-T, the reauthorization, until after the 2010 election. but say that we are going to take $200 billion and apply it to the nation's infrastructure right now, or very soon after right now, and say we're going to borrow it from whatever the eventual appropriation for ICE-T is. Let's say it's $500 million. Take $200 million upfront, get it done now, figure out and bite the bullet and get a way to pay for it as you reauthorize ICE-T, because they're going to have to find a way to pay for it anyway. But upfront that money, borrow it from the Treasury, you have the Treasury deliver it to the Highway Trust Fund, and let's get going now. And we can do that and still pay for it without any additional funding, because we're going to have to pay for it once we reauthorize ICE-T as well. I think that's the best way to do it. I think it would have a dramatic effect. Again, you see, Rosa said 47,000 jobs for every billion is spending. I'm a little more conservative, 20 to 40, somewhere in between. But whatever the figure is, it's impressive. It's the best way to get people working in family-sustaining jobs. And if you look at the economy, the two sectors that have been hit the worst, construction and manufacturing. What does infrastructure impact? Construction and manufacturing.
Okay, we've got time for a few questions now. In the back, yes, sir.
Jim Scarlett with Maine USA Strategies. I have a question for Governor Rendell. Governor, one of the brightest spots in our economic prospects right now, in our dismal economic picture, is the Marcellus gas shale fields and the other fields that were being discovered in the U.S. There's a tremendous infrastructure project right now being undertaken in Pennsylvania. I'm from Washington County, and it's the installation of all the pipelines to carry that gas. Last summer I went to look at the holding pens for the gas pipe and found that it was all from Hyundai, Hisco Steel. Now you're the governor, you're not to blame for our disastrous trade policy at the federal level, which seems to be based on toleration of predatory trade for decades, but there must be something that you can do about a situation like this. I mean, those companies are coming to the state for all sorts of permissions. There's a bully pulpit. We have the U.S. Steel pipe at McKeesport, right up the road,
Right.
working half-time.
I understand your question, and you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, even in the stimulus, the Buy American portion of the stimulus, we had to tread very lightly because of WTO rules. And again, I'm not necessarily against WTO rules as long as they're enforced everywhere. And I don't believe they're being enforced everywhere. If you look at the chart, when President Clinton was president, the U.S. Issued as many complaints to the WTO as were issued against us, roughly. When the Bush administration took over, whatever the reasoning, our complaints dropped to about a fourth of the complaints that were being issued against us. We've got to be more aggressive in the way we apply the WTO rules. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And there are certain things that can be done to help our industries. And the pipe example, and you talk about McKeesport, you're absolutely right. But we lost in Pennsylvania alone 5,000 jobs in the pipe industry. China was clearly violating. We could have dropped the quota card on them, and we didn't for 4 years because we're afraid to do anything with the Chinese.
Okay.
Can I just add to that for a second? Because I think it's important. There's the loss of jobs, but I think what has really gotten lost in this whole debate about the trade and loss of jobs is the loss of technology and our cutting-edge technology. We don't build anything anymore in this country, which we need to do. That's, again, for me, this infrastructure bank, which looks at energy, looks at smart grid, looks at broadband, looks at some other areas, gives us another opportunity to focus in on just energy and on technology that once again would put us ahead of the rest of the world in some of these areas.
And we don't invent anything anymore. 2 years ago, the U.S. Patent Office, for the first time in history, noted that 50% plus of their patents went to foreign nationals or foreign companies.
Okay, in front here, please.
Thank you. I'd like to address this question to both Governor Rendell and Congresswoman DeLauro. You talk about job creation, very important here in D.C. and Northern Virginia. We're not really being hit hard. And you talk about a stimulus package, another one. I guess because I was raised with parents who grew up in the Depression, there were wants and there are needs. Last night, Ben Stein, I happened to catch him on some CNN program, said, Wall Street owns this country. So as you propose another program being run by the Department of the Treasury, how are we going to pay for this? How much longer can we keep printing out money and the deficit and the debt? And yes, jobs are important. And if they are construction and tech, what happens to the farmers? What happens to the people in the Midwest? Not just here. Thank you.
First of all, I think look, growing up in the Depression, I wanted to talk about infrastructure writ large. I mean, there were all kinds of efforts that were tried. Some succeeded and some failed. But the notion was to make significant investment to help to grow the economy. I'm sorry, I lost you. The Treasury. Well, first of all, let me just talk about the deficit, because the deficit, people think about the deficit between January and October. We didn't get to this deficit overnight. We had tax cuts, we had wars, we had a prescription drug benefit that was not paid for. And no one seemed to worry about the scope and the size of that deficit. And then when, in January, quite frankly, given the information that we had about the almost near collapse of financial markets, there was the view that we moved to the TARP program, and yes, we helped it and bailed out Wall Street. I'm not quite, for me, I'm not particularly excited about what I've seen recently in terms of bonuses and perks and a whole variety of other things associated with these financial institutions when we have provided them with money on Wall Street. And what we try to do is to do a stimulus package with $787 billion to, one, address jobs, two, to prevent states from having to lay off people, and three, to lay down some opportunities for the future. I think that when you the only place in which you can go to borrow on the capital markets and deal with private investors at the scope and the scale of which we need to deal with rebuilding America, that this kind of an effort in a national infrastructure bank has to be under the Treasury Department. Otherwise, you will continue, and an independent entity, I might add. So we're not looking at an earmark process either in the House of Representatives or in the United States Senate. So when the request comes in, it is because someone has an interest in it, etc. This is an independent entity which has a board of directors, etc., makes decisions about what projects will be determined, and has callable capital of up to $250 billion. So we can't decry the Treasury Department, for all kinds of things, but this is the appropriate place for it to go.
Okay, I think I just want to, just real quickly, we talk about, can we afford it? Well, what have we gotten for the money we've invested so far? What do we get for the bailout for the banks? Zero. At least we're going to get a return if we invest in infrastructure. Let's say you did $2 trillion, and I know Rosa wants to do less and she's much more realistic, but $2 trillion would be about $180 billion a year in debt service. That's a lot of money over a 10-year period, a lot of money. But it's a little bit about the way the CBO scores. Because I will tell you that if we invested $2 trillion in infrastructure, that's going to produce an awful lot of taxes that otherwise wouldn't be produced, because that work is not going to get done unless we invest in it. So there's never any offset when the CBO scores. You do $2 trillion of work. There's going to be a lot of federal income tax paid. There's going to be a lot of federal business tax paid. There's going to be a lot of taxes to local government and state government. The CBO doesn't care about that, I understand. They probably should, but they don't. And it's just the way we score it. But unless we invest in our future, hey, name me a business that grew without investing in its own future. Businesses borrow. They make prudent borrowing decisions that they can pay back, and that's how they grow. And unless we invest in our future in America, we're cooked. We are absolutely cooked. The worst thing that's happened in my 32 years in politics is this mania against government spending. There's good government spending and bad government spending. We should be against bad government spending. We should be for good government spending.
Thank you very much. Thank our panelists.
I want to thank Marylin Geewax, Governor Ed Rendell, and Representative Rosa DeLauro. Thank you so much for your thoughts this morning. We're going to move